Will soldiers of the future fly around in Iron Man-like suits, punching through walls and fending off bullets with their futuristic exoskeletons? Sounds cool, but have you ever wondered why is this still not reality? Today we take a look at 3 reasons why exoskeletons and the military have a complicated relationship and what's the future of this technology. So the first issue that we have to mention when talking about exoskeletons is power, because exoskeletons can be pretty power-hungry machines. So where do you get all this power from? Normally, batteries is what they're used for many exoskeletons, and this is an issue for all kinds of exoskeletons, not just for the military ones, also for the industrial or for the exoskeletons used in therapeutical applications. But for military ones, it's even more problematic because we're considering the fact that the soldiers have, for example, to go in operations for extended periods of time, so the exoskeletons are supposed to work for several days potentially. And of course you have also the concern of what happens if power goes out, because if you are in an industrial setting, if you're like lifting some crates and power goes out, well, it's one thing. If you're a soldier on a battlefield and power goes out, it's a separate kind of problem. So we can take a look at several cases of exoskeletons realized for the armies around the world that highlighted this issue of power. So the first exoskeleton that we take a look at is the Ratnik, which is a Russian exoskeleton made by Rostec. It was advertised at the time as an exoskeleton capable of enhancing the capabilities of a soldier, like allowing the soldiers to shoot a rifle with one hand. And it included also some protective and life support elements. And in fact, it was actually tested on the battlefield, tested on the field in Syria in around 2016-2017. But the first iteration of this exoskeleton was in fact a passive one. Other kinds of iterations of this exoskeleton with powered applications like with batteries were also tested, but in 2018 the Russian media pointed out how in fact the performance was not very good. They were capable of achieving around 4 hours of battery lifetime, which is not good on the battlefield, which is why some Russian observers pointed out how exoskeletons like this are still going to be science fiction at the moment. But autonomy is not the only issue, because a second issue is the fact that batteries themselves, they weigh a lot. A second case where you can take a look at is the Guardian Exo from Sarcos, which is an exoskeleton that will actually be commercially available from 2022, for example for industrial applications. It is a very bulky exoskeleton, allowing the user to lift up to 90 kilograms, around 200 pounds. It has an 8 hours battery, but after these 8 hours it requires of course resupply or changing the battery. And the battery weighs around 13 kilograms, 30 pounds, so it's a pretty heavy battery, and it's some added load that soldiers should have to carry around with them, which is why it's not very suited for the battlefield. Rather it's best for industrial settings or even military logistics settings. But for a soldier on the battlefield to bring around, in addition to his own equipment, also a 13 kilograms battery, that's a no-no. A similar case is the Talos exoskeleton by Socom, which was a battery-powered hydraulic exoskeleton. And this time, this exoskeleton was meant for actual combat scenarios. It was in fact defined an Iron Man suit. It was meant to be a rigid exoskeleton with some bulletproof outer shell, and its purpose was to improve the survivability of the user, also to improve the strength and sensing capabilities of the user. It was proposed initially in 2013, and it was very hyped. We can see right now a very wacky promotional video with this soldier with the exoskeleton bursting through a door, immune to gunfire. But in fact the exoskeleton was retired in 2019. The battery again was deemed too heavy for use in combat scenarios. Again, it was weighing like 13 kilograms, 30 pounds. A second issue that we have to point out is related to movement and control, so basically the biomechanical aspect of the exoskeleton, which is a big issue for exoskeletons in general, being able to replicate the movement of the user, but in fact when it comes to military exoskeletons it's even more challenging. Compared to other applications like industrial applications or therapeutical applications, in fact soldiers and their exoskeletons, they have to go through different kinds of movements: kneeling, jumping, running, sidestepping, getting on and off a vehicle. All these are things that normal industrial or even theoretical exoskeletons don't have to do. And in addition, you have to consider the fact that soldiers, they have to carry also their own equipment in addition to the exoskeleton. So they have to carry all their supplies, the backpack, the weapons, and the ammunition, and even some body armor. So you have to integrate several different factors into the movement. It's not just moving a person, it's moving a person in different operational scenarios, very complex operational scenarios. And the thing is, you can be able to move 2 tons, 3 tons, 10 tons, doesn't matter, because if you're not able to move them freely and without any issues, then an exoskeleton is no use. A case that we can highlight is the Human Universal Load Carrier, also known as HULK. It was developed by Exobionics and Lockheed Martin, and it was an hydraulic-powered exoskeleton meant to support the lower body of the soldier. Its purpose was in fact to support the carrying of heavy loads, up to around 90 kilograms, 200 pounds. The suit itself was weighing around 40 kilograms, and it had 8 hours autonomy. This kind of exoskeleton was launched in 2009, but it was in fact retired years later because of some biomechanical issue. In fact, the exoskeleton was causing the soldiers to become even more strained. The soldiers were making more effort. They were burning more calories when using the exoskeleton than without the exoskeleton. This points to the fact that our knowledge of the human body and of the biomechanical aspects of the human body, like the gait, the movement, are still lacking. Hugh Herr, who is an MIT engineer, pointed out how exoskeletons are basically at the moment fancy exercise machines, because they're too bulky and they're too slow to be able to follow the natural rhythm of the human body, of the human gait. So for the time being, probably soldiers would have to keep carrying all the equipment by themselves and work on those squats. The third issue that we see is reaction times, and this is a very specific issue to military applications. This is not something that we're concerned when we're talking about industrial exoskeletons or exoskeletons for medical applications. But a 2018 MIT study observed how using exoskeletons might in fact increase the reaction times of the user, so slowing the reaction of the soldier. During this study, 12 participants have to walk through an obstacle course while performing some visual tasks, like for example pointing to some targets. And the scientists measured the reaction times of the soldiers, and they observed the soldiers had slower reactions than when not wearing an exoskeleton. So apparently, according to the scientists, soldiers during this exercise, they focus too much on the movement of the exoskeleton and less on the surrounding environment. Basically, by using exoskeleton, they were placing too much attention, too many cognitive capabilities and cognitive resources, let's say, on moving the exoskeleton one step at a time, instead of, moving naturally and looking at the external environment. And of course, when it comes to reaction times, this is a big issue in a potential combat scenario, because you don't want soldiers to be slowed down by an exoskeleton, because of course in a combat scenario every fraction of a second can count. So, is it all lost? Is the love story between exoskeletons and the military all over? Well, in fact, there might be a future to it. It's just not as science fiction imagine it. Future potential area of application of military exoskeletons, like I mentioned earlier, is logistics. So we're talking about exoskeletons being used in scenarios far from combat. We're talking about, for example, assisting in vehicle maintenance or handling heavy loads in warehouses. In these situations, logistic troops might appreciate a bulky exoskeleton like the Guardian Exo, and in fact some groups from the US Army are in fact considering this kind of exoskeleton to assist them in operations. But in addition to bulky exoskeletons for logistics, military is also considering different kinds of exoskeletons, like passive exoskeletons or exosuits, like the Warrior Web program that was launched by DARPA in 2011. And the purpose of this program was to develop some solutions to protect the injury-prone areas of the soldiers, like the ankles and the knees. So the result of this program was the development of several lightweight undersuits. So instead of having a rigid exoskeleton, you have this exosuit, which is a suit that can be worn over clothes. It's a combination of soft fabrics, cables and some actuators that can help soldiers with their movements. It doesn't have a load-bearing rigid structure like the exoskeleton seen before, rather it relies on the bones to carry much of the weight. But still, thanks to a combination of the fabrics and actuator, it can help the soldiers in carrying a bit of a load. And in fact, being this exosuit soft, it increases its wearability. In addition, it has a very modest power consumption, around 50 to 150 watts. The goal of a Warrior web program from DARPA was just to demonstrate the feasibility of this kind of exoskeleton, but they had big dreams, and according to them, this kind of exosuit might be worn in the future by around 90% of the US Army population. Because of course, again, we're talking about an exoskeleton that is much less bulkier, it's much easier to wear for the soldiers, so it's something that can be more easily adopted by the army. So it seems like the militaries are still kind of chasing the dream. Maybe they just lowered a little bit their expectations. So what do you think about these applications and about exoskeletons for the military? Let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in more videos about these topics, I invite you to subscribe to my channel. I thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.